Nobody could touch this dog. No one dared. Shadow wasn't just another rescue. He was a warning wrapped in fur, pacing behind steel bars. People whispered his name like it carried weight, a ghost story told between new volunteers. "Don't get too close," they'd say. "He'll go for your throat." 8 months in the shelter had only hardened him. Once found chained to a rusted fence on a deserted farm, ribs like knuckles through his skin, Shadow had learned to expect pain from humans. He didn't wag his tail, didn't beg for attention like the others. He stayed curled in the corner, his eyes hollow, untrusting, waiting for someone to try and fail to reach him. His growls came from somewhere deeper than aggression, somewhere bruised, betrayed. Everyone thought he was broken beyond repair, until the day Dr. Rachel Moore walked through the shelter doors with her 10-year-old daughter, Leia. Rachel was a trauma therapist, not a dog adopter. She hadn't come looking for a pet, but when she and Leia passed by Shadow's kennel, something stopped her. Not a sound, not a movement, just a stare. His eyes met hers, and Rachel felt a shiver travel through her. He didn't bark. He didn't snarl. He didn't ask to be saved. He just looked at her with eyes that said, "I dare you to try." Rachel didn't approach. She sat down instead, far enough not to provoke, close enough to witness. And when Leia knelt beside her, calm and curious, something shifted, not in Shadow, but in them. "He's not angry," Leia whispered, eyes locked on the trembling beast. "He's scared." And somehow, those soft words, spoken by a child with nothing but gentleness in her heart, cracked something that had been closed for far too long. In the days that followed, Rachel and Leia returned to the shelter, not to adopt, not yet, but to show up. Every visit was the same. They would sit on the cold concrete floor across from Shadow's kennel, not speaking to him, not coaxing, just being there. Rachel read from whatever book she had in her bag, her voice low and steady, while Leia sketched quietly, her pencil strokes forming softer versions of a dog the world had learned to fear. Shadow never came close, but he also stopped growling. He watched, he listened, and slowly, ever so slowly, his body stopped trembling. For the first time in 8 months, he lay down in full view of a human. It wasn't surrender. It was consideration. Trish, the shelter manager, noticed the shift first. "He's never done that," she murmured one afternoon, watching from a distance as Shadow rested his chin between his paws, his eyes following Leia's sketching hand instead of tracking potential threats. Rachel said nothing. She understood trauma like this. Healing didn't shout, it whispered. Then one day, without warning, Shadow crept toward the front of the kennel. Not far, just a foot, just enough for his nose to meet the mesh where Leia had gently placed her drawing. It was a picture of him beneath a tree, a girl beside him, both looking out toward a quiet field. He sniffed the paper, then retreated again. But the moment was everything. "He sees her," Rachel whispered, tears pricking her eyes. "He finally sees her." That night, Rachel couldn't sleep. Leia's words echoed in her mind. "Maybe he's waiting for someone like us." She opened her laptop and filled out the adoption application, her fingers trembling not with fear, but hope. A broken dog, a brave little girl, and maybe, just maybe, a second chance for them all. The shelter board meeting felt more like a courtroom than a conversation. Rachel sat at the long table, hands clasped, heart pounding. She wasn't just advocating for a dog, she was pleading for a soul. The head veterinarian, Dr. Morgan, was the first to speak. "Shadow is dangerous," he said firmly. "Unpredictable. He belongs in a secure facility, not in a home with a child." Rachel took a breath, steadying her voice. "He's not aggressive by nature. He's terrified. His behavior is rooted in trauma, not violence. And I believe, I know, that with the right structure, he can heal." A murmur swept through the room. One board member leaned forward. "You're a single parent. What makes you think you're equipped to handle something like this?" Rachel didn't flinch. "Because I work with trauma every day. I work from home. I've built my life around helping others reclaim safety. And I'm not doing this alone. My daughter, Leia, is careful, observant, and she's the reason I even noticed Shadow in the first place." Silence followed. Then Trish spoke up, her voice quiet but unwavering. "I've seen them together. That little girl sat in front of Shadow's kennel for an hour. He didn't growl. That's never happened. Ever. The vote was split, 4-3, but the decision stood. Rachel's application was approved, under strict conditions. Weekly updates, sessions with a canine behaviorist, and immediate return if any incident occurred. As she signed the paperwork, she caught sight of Leia through the shelter window. Her daughter's eyes lit up, her hand pressed to the glass in silent celebration. Rachel smiled back, the weight of the moment settling in her chest. It wasn't just a dog they were bringing home. It was a shattered spirit, and they were offering something rare, a lifeline. Getting Shadow home wasn't simple. He refused to enter the crate, backing away with a low growl every time someone moved closer. His eyes were wide, darting, trapped in invisible memories that had left scars deeper than skin. Rachel didn't force him. Instead, she and Trish crafted a different plan. Using a series of gentle barriers, they created a soft enclosure in the back of Rachel's SUV. A space with no pressure, just choice. It took nearly 30 minutes. Shadow paced, hesitated, sniffed, and withdrew over and over. Leia sat quietly on the curb, not speaking, not coaxing, just watching. Her presence was steady, calm. She held her sketchbook in her lap, one hand resting on the page, as if grounding herself. And finally, Shadow stepped in. Not because he was told to, but because he chose to. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. Leia's eyes met his through the window, her small hand lifting gently. Not a wave, but a silent promise. We see you. We're here. The ride home was tense. Shadow didn't lie down. He panted, his muscles tight, eyes darting. But he didn't growl. He didn't bark. Rachel kept the radio off. No noise, no disruption. Just the hum of the road and the occasional rustle of paper as Leia flipped through her drawings. That day's picture showed Shadow beneath a tree again, but this time, there was a leash between him and the girl. Not pulling, not restraining, just connecting. When they arrived at their small white farmhouse, the sun was dipping low, casting a golden hush across the porch. Rachel stepped out first, leaving the car doors open. She placed a training lead gently on the gravel and stood back. Shadow watched. Then, cautiously, he stepped down and followed her, tense, alert, but moving forward. Inside, Rachel had prepared everything with the precision of a therapist and the love of a mother. Shadow's space was warm, quiet, safe. No crate with a door, just a large, open sleeping nook lined with soft blankets and toys that hadn't yet known teeth. No loud appliances. No sudden movements. Just peace. Rachel believed in healing environments, and this was one. Leia stood in the hallway, peeking around the corner. "Is this his forever spot?" she whispered. Rachel nodded, smiling softly. "If he wants it to be." Shadow stood near the entrance, still as a statue, surveying his new world. He didn't enter. He didn't relax. But he didn't run. That was enough. Over the next few hours, they gave him space. Leia tiptoed around him like he was made of glass, her curiosity blooming into understanding. She never reached out, never called his name. She just drew dozens of pictures, left near his space like peace offerings. Shadow didn't approach them, but each morning, one drawing had moved, nudged a few inches from where it had been. The first time Rachel saw it, she felt a lump rise in her throat. He was watching. He was listening. He was trying. On the fifth night, Leia fell asleep beside the doorway to his space, her blanket pulled close, sketchpad clutched to her chest. And sometime before dawn, Shadow crept forward, not to wake her, not to sniff her, just to be near her. Rachel, standing quietly in the hallway, watched as this dog, this unreachable creature, lay down just a few feet away from the little girl who had never stopped believing in him. And for the first time since he'd come home, Shadow closed his eyes in peace. Progress didn't come like a sunrise. It came like flickers of moonlight through clouds. Some days were quiet victories. Others felt like starting over. Shadow didn't bark, didn't wag his tail, didn't play fetch or chase butterflies like dogs in storybooks. But he was beginning to exist in the world again. Rachel kept a journal of every milestone. The first time he accepted food from her hand, the moment he walked a full circle around the living room without freezing, The day he rested his head briefly, just for a second, on Leia's foot as she read aloud from her favorite chapter book. Each moment was a breath held and then released. They didn't push him. They didn't praise him with squeals or claps. Just quiet acknowledgement. Trust was his reward. Their home shifted to accommodate his healing. Rachel moved her work meetings to the early mornings. Leia began waking up before school to sit near Shadow with her breakfast, sketchbook always close. "He's like a puzzle," she told her mom one evening, "with some missing pieces. But I think we can find them, even if we have to make some of our own." Rachel smiled at that. Her daughter's heart seemed to pulse with a wisdom far beyond her age. Then came the day Shadow followed Leia outside for the first time. It was just a few steps onto the porch, but to Rachel, it felt like he'd crossed a country. He sniffed the air, ears twitching, eyes scanning the open space with suspicion and longing. Leia sat down on the steps, pulling out another drawing. She didn't even glance his way. And that, somehow, made all the difference. Shadow stepped forward, sat beside her, not touching, but close enough to feel her warmth. And there they stayed, girl and dog, side by side under a quiet sky. But healing is never linear. It was a Tuesday when the storm rolled in, sudden, violent, and loud. Thunder cracked so sharply it rattled the windows. Rachel had just stepped into the kitchen when she heard it, a guttural, terrified bark. Not anger, panic. She rushed to the living room to find Shadow cornered, his body trembling, lips pulled back. Not in aggression, but desperation. Leia stood frozen, unsure. "Don't move, sweetheart," Rachel said gently, stepping between them. She knelt slowly, hands open. "It's okay, Shadow. It's just a storm. You're safe." But Shadow's eyes were wild. He backed further into the wall, chest heaving. Rachel didn't move, didn't speak again, just breathed. And after a long, aching moment, Shadow let out a low, broken whimper and lowered himself to the floor. Rachel didn't cry. She couldn't. Her heart was too full of something rawer than sadness. Empathy. Shadow wasn't relapsing. He was remembering. Somewhere in his past, thunder had meant fear, pain, maybe worse. And now, in this quiet farmhouse, it meant safety being tested. Leia sat down at a distance, her small voice steady. "Can I draw him?" she asked. Rachel nodded. "If you think it'll help." As the rain poured and thunder boomed, Leia drew. Her pencil danced across the page. Shadow beneath a blanket, eyes closed, a gentle storm outside the window. She held it up, showing it to him like a lullaby. Shadow didn't come forward, but he looked. And for the rest of the storm, he stayed on the floor, not hidden, not running, just near, just present. And sometimes, that's the bravest thing of all. After the storm, something in Shadow shifted, like a door had creaked open just enough to let a sliver of light in. The next morning, Rachel found him lying in the hallway outside Leia's room, his head resting on his front paws. He wasn't asleep. He was waiting. When Leia opened her door, she didn't gasp or run. She just smiled and said softly, "Good morning, Shadow." And for the first time, his tail gave a single, hesitant wag. Rachel saw it from the kitchen and covered her mouth with her hand. It was a small gesture, barely there, but it spoke volumes. Something had cracked in that wall he'd built around his heart. Later that day, as Leia sat on the living room rug coloring, Shadow patted over. Not slowly, not cautiously, just naturally. He lay down beside her, his body finally at ease. Rachel had to blink back tears as she watched her daughter place a gentle hand on his back. Not to pet him, not to claim him, but just to connect. No words were spoken. None were needed. Rachel felt like a guest in that sacred moment between child and dog. Two old souls who had found each other not by chance, but by something deeper, something almost divine. Shadow's transformation wasn't just noticed at home. At the shelter, whispers turned into wide eyes as Rachel brought him back for his weekly check-ins. "Is that Shadow?" one volunteer murmured, watching him walk beside Rachel, leash loose. "Step steady." Dr. Morgan examined him carefully, his expression unreadable. "He's different," he said after a long pause. "Quieter, like he's listening again." Rachel didn't argue. She didn't need to prove anything. Shadow's progress spoke for itself. Leia came with them every time, her sketchbook clutched to her side like armor. She showed the staff her drawings, Shadow in their garden, Shadow with a flower crown, Shadow asleep beside her reading nook. One staff member, who'd once refused to go near the kennel, stared at the images in disbelief. He looks happy. And he was. Not in the way people often define happiness, with wagging tails and playful barks, but in the stillness, in the way his body no longer trembled, in the way he sought out Leia before sleep, in the way he trusted Rachel enough to walk into a building that once felt like a prison. Trish knelt beside him, tears in her eyes. "You saved him," she whispered. Rachel shook her head. "We didn't save him. He chose to let us in." One autumn afternoon, Rachel decided it was time. They drove to a nearby field, a wide, open space with golden grass swaying under a gentle breeze. She clipped a long lead to Shadow's harness, just in case, but something told her he wouldn't need it. Leia ran ahead, arms stretched like wings, laughter echoing through the sky. Rachel knelt beside Shadow, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're free, boy. No more chains. No more cages." Shadow looked at the field, then at her, and then he ran. Not away, forward, ears flying, muscles stretching, each stride shedding years of fear. Rachel laughed through her tears, watching him chase the wind like it belonged to him. Leia ran toward him, and for the first time, he didn't flinch. He circled her, barked, a real bark, full and wild, and gently nudged her side with his nose. She spun, giggling, falling into the grass. He lay beside her, panting happily, tongue out, eyes bright. Rachel sank to her knees, overwhelmed. This was the dog no one could touch. This was the soul deemed broken beyond repair. And here he was, living. Not surviving. Not existing. Living. That night, as they returned home, the sky painted in deep blues and burnt oranges, Rachel sat on the porch with a cup of tea, her heart full. Shadow rested at her feet, his head nestled against her slipper. Leia was inside, singing softly to herself as she packed her school bag. Rachel looked down at the dog, who had once cowered from every sound, every shadow. She reached out and gently scratched behind his ear. He didn't flinch. He sighed, a deep, satisfied sigh that rumbled through his body. "You've come so far," she whispered, "and we're not done yet." Behind her, the porch light flicked on. Inside their home, warmth glowed in every room, drawings on the fridge, paw prints on the floor, laughter echoing from the hallway. Shadow had become part of the story, woven into their lives like thread through fabric. Rachel knew the world was still uncertain, that trauma doesn't vanish, that healing isn't a destination. But sitting there, in that moment, with Shadow asleep beside her and her daughter humming inside, she felt something she hadn't in a long time. Hope. Not just for Shadow, but for every broken thing learning how to be whole again. Weeks passed, and the changes in Shadow grew deeper, more profound. He started greeting Rachel at the door when she came in from errands, tail wagging low and slow. He no longer startled at thunder, not if Leia was near. They began going on daily walks, first around the block, then through the park, and eventually into town. People began to notice him, the once unadoptable dog now walking with poise beside a child. Some asked questions. Others simply stared. One elderly woman reached down and offered him a treat. He took it gently, eyes calm. "What's his name?" she asked. "Shadow," Rachel replied. The woman smiled. "That fits. He's quiet, but he's watching everything. Like he's guarding you." Rachel nodded. "He is. And we're guarding him right back." Every day, Leia would draw a new picture, now full of color. No more gray skies or anxious eyes. Just joy. Just life. One morning, she brought home a crayon drawing that made Rachel stop in her tracks. It was the three of them, Rachel, Leia, and Shadow, standing under a tree. And above them, in big block letters, she had written, "We saved each other." Rachel hung it on the wall, by the front door. Every time she passed it, she smiled, because it wasn't just art, it was truth. Winter crept in slowly, blanketing the little farmhouse in soft white snow. While many dogs feared the cold, Shadow seemed enchanted by it. The first time he stepped into the snow-covered yard, he paused, ears perked, tail stiff with curiosity. Then, with a sudden burst, he began bounding through the snow like a pup discovering joy for the first time. Leia stood at the window, watching him with delight. "He's smiling," she whispered, her voice full of awe. Rachel glanced out and nodded. His mouth was open, tongue lolling, eyes shining, not with fear, but with wonder. Later that day, they bundled up and joined him outside. Leia made snow angels, while Shadow playfully nudged her boots, tossing snow with his snout. Rachel hadn't seen her daughter this happy since, well, maybe ever. It wasn't just shadow healing. Their home, once quiet and careful, was now alive, with laughter, with warmth, with hope. As snowflakes danced around them, Leia leaned down and whispered into Shadow's ear, "See, the world's not so scary when you've got someone who loves you." Shadow looked up at her with soft, steady eyes, and for the first time, Rachel saw a flicker of something that had been absent for so long: trust. Real rooted trust. But healing, as Rachel knew all too well, is never linear. One evening, as she and Leia returned from the grocery store, they found Shadow trembling near the back door. A neighbor's truck had backfired nearby, loud, sudden, aggressive. The sound had taken Shadow back to a place none of them could see. His body was rigid, his breathing shallow, his eyes wide with panic. Leia dropped her bag and slowly approached, getting low to the ground like Rachel had taught her. "Shadow," she whispered, her voice calm, steady, full of love. "You're safe now. It's just me. Just Leia." Rachel watched from the porch, heart in her throat, as her daughter inched closer and closer. And then, something beautiful happened. Shadow lowered his head into her lap, not because he was fully okay, but because he wanted to be. Rachel knelt beside them, wrapping an arm around both. "It's okay," she said softly. "Fear doesn't mean failure. It just means you remember." That night, Shadow slept curled up at the foot of Leia's bed, closer than ever before. Rachel knew there would be other setbacks, other echoes from the past. But now, he didn't have to face them alone. They were a team, a family. Healing, yes, but together. By spring, Shadow had become something of a local legend. The once untouchable dog was now the quiet guardian of their block. Children who had once crossed the street when they saw him now offered shy smiles and hesitant waves. Leia began taking him to a nearby field every weekend, where she read aloud while he lay beside her, head resting on her legs. One afternoon, a boy approached, maybe 9 or 10, with cautious steps. His name was Mason, and he had lost his own dog the year before. Leia noticed the sadness in his eyes and said, "You can sit with us if you want." Mason hesitated, then slowly lowered himself to the grass. Shadow didn't move away. In fact, he inched closer, sensing the boy's quiet grief. Rachel watched from a bench nearby, her heart swelling. She had once told Leia that Shadow would need a village to heal, but now it seemed he was becoming the village, offering comfort, presence, peace. Mason began coming every week, and others joined too. Before long, the little field became a gathering spot for quiet kids, anxious parents, and one once broken dog who taught them all what resilience looked like in fur and bone. The local news caught wind of Shadow's story. One morning, a reporter named Jess came by the house to do a piece on the dog who changed the town. Rachel was hesitant at first. She didn't want to turn Shadow into a spectacle. But Leia convinced her. "People need to know that being broken doesn't mean you're not worthy of love," she said, wise beyond her years. So Rachel agreed. During the interview, Shadow stayed close to Leia, calmly resting his head on her lap as the camera rolled. Jess asked about his journey, about the aggression, the fear, the transformation. Rachel answered with honesty. He didn't change overnight. He had every reason to give up on people, but he didn't. He just needed one person to believe in him. When the segment aired, messages poured in from across the state. Letters from trauma survivors, veterans, children in foster care. They saw themselves in Shadow. They saw hope. One note simply read, "I was like him, scared, angry, but now I think maybe I can heal too." Rachel read it aloud to Leia, and they both cried, because the story wasn't just about a dog anymore. It was about every soul who'd ever been pushed aside, and what could happen if just one person reached out. Months turned into a year, and Shadow was no longer the same dog who'd once cowered in a corner, growling at the world. He had become a symbol, not just of healing, but of transformation. Rachel started a small support group in town for trauma survivors, and guess who sat in the corner during those meetings? Quiet and steady? Shadow. People opened up in his presence. Veterans talked about things they'd never said aloud. Children who had suffered abuse found comfort in brushing his fur. One little girl, barely 6, sat beside him for 10 minutes without saying a word. Then she whispered, "You're not scary. You're brave." Rachel watched as Shadow rested his paw gently on the girl's shoe, like he understood. Leia had begun writing a book, Shadow's Story, a dog who learned to trust again. She said it wasn't just about Shadow. It was about anyone who had ever been lost, angry, or scared, and how sometimes all it took was one person to stay, one person to say, "I see you. I'm not leaving." That, Rachel realized, was the core of everything. Not grand gestures or flashy heroics, just the quiet, stubborn persistence of love. One summer evening, the town hosted its annual community fair. It was bustling, bright lights, loud music, the scent of kettle corn and grilled corn in the air, a place that would have once overwhelmed Shadow. But this year he came, on a long leash, beside Leia, walking calmly through the crowd. Rachel watched closely, ready to intervene, but Shadow didn't flinch. He stuck close to Leia's side, his ears alert but relaxed. Children approached him cautiously, asking if they could pet him. Leia always smiled and said, "If he comes to you, then yes." And he did. One by one, Shadow leaned into hands that once would have terrified him. The shelter manager, Trish, spotted them from across the fairgrounds. Her eyes widened, hand rising to her mouth. "Is that Shadow?" she said, tears brimming. Rachel nodded. "The same one you thought would never let anyone in." Trish knelt beside him, and Shadow sniffed her fingers before pressing his head gently into her palm. She wept openly. "You're not the same dog," she whispered. Rachel leaned down, smiling. "He is. He just remembered who he was before the hurt." That night, as fireworks cracked across the sky, Shadow didn't cower. He sat beside Leia, eyes on the lights, her hand resting calmly on his back. Not one flinch, just quiet wonder. But as the months rolled on, Shadow's age began to show. His once powerful stride slowed. The graying around his muzzle spread. Some mornings, he took longer to get out of his bed. Leia noticed first. "He's tired," she whispered one morning, watching him struggle to climb the porch steps. Rachel nodded, her heart heavy. "He's older now, but we'll make sure every day feels like gold." They started giving him soft food, heating it just right. Leia fluffed his bedding every morning, and Rachel added a heated blanket for the colder nights. They adjusted their routines around his needs. Walks became strolls. Fetch turned into sunbathing. Yet, even as his body slowed, Shadow's spirit never dimmed. He still greeted Leia every morning with a gentle nudge and followed her from room to room. His eyes held wisdom now, a quiet peace that comes from knowing you're safe. One afternoon, Rachel found Leia curled up beside him, reading aloud. Her voice was soft, the pages turning gently. "He's not just a dog, Mama," she said. "He's our guardian. He helped us heal too." Rachel brushed a tear from her cheek, because she knew it was true. In helping Shadow rise, they had each learned how to stand taller, love deeper, and fear less. Shadow's final days came quietly, like a soft sunset folding into the horizon. One morning, he didn't get up for breakfast. Leia brought his bowl, his favorite soft blanket, and knelt beside him. He looked at her, eyes calm, body still, and gave her one last gentle sigh, as if to say, "Thank you." Rachel sat beside them, wrapping them both in her arms. No panic calls to the vet, no emergency runs. Just presence, just love. The vet came to their home later that afternoon. Leia held Shadow's paw the entire time, whispering stories of their adventures together. "You were never broken," she said through tears. "You were just waiting for someone to see your light." As Shadow passed, the room was silent. No chaos, no fear. Just warmth. Just peace. That night, Rachel and Leah buried him beneath the oak tree in the field where he'd once watched the sky beside her sketch pad. They carved a simple stone. Shadow, you were always worth saving. In the weeks that followed, the house felt quieter, but not empty. His presence lingered in every corner, every room, every warm sunbeam spilling across the floor. Rachel often caught Leah sitting by the window, sketching. Not sad, just remembering. The field where Shadow was buried became something more in the months that followed. Children still gathered there. Mason, the shy boy who found his voice beside Shadow, now led a group for kids who had lost pets. Leah brought her book drafts there every week, reading them aloud beneath the tree where Shadow rested. Parents came too, sitting in a circle, sharing stories of fear, loss, and love. Rachel had unknowingly started a movement, not by intention, but by simply choosing compassion. The town, once known for its quiet, now had a new identity. The place where a girl and a dog reminded everyone how to hope again. Local schools started inviting Leah to talk about Shadow. She always spoke from her heart, her words raw and full of truth. Shadow taught me that even the angriest heart can soften if someone believes in it. Sometimes, people don't need fixing. They just need space to be seen. After one of her talks, a teacher approached Rachel, wiping her eyes. I think that dog did more for this town than any program we've ever had. Rachel smiled. He didn't try to change anyone. He just showed up with his heart open. That was enough. 1 year after Shadow's passing, on a golden afternoon, Rachel and Leah returned to the shelter. Trish welcomed them with open arms. It's not the same without him, she admitted, voice thick with emotion. But then she smiled. We have a new one who reminds me of him. In the far corner, a young German shepherd sat, eyes wary, body tight, just like Shadow had once been. Leah didn't rush. She knelt a few feet away, pulling out her sketch pad, starting to draw. Rachel sat beside her, both of them silent. The dog watched them, unsure, but didn't growl. Leah whispered, just like she once said years ago, "We see you, and we're not afraid." Rachel reached into her bag and pulled out a copy of Shadow's story, placing it gently on the floor between them and the kennel. "We're not here to fix you," she said softly. "We're here to walk with you, however long it takes." And just like that, the circle began again, not as a replacement, but as a continuation. Because healing isn't a destination, it's a legacy. And Shadow's legacy was now etched not just in one family's heart, but in an entire community's soul. The new shepherd's name was Axel. Unlike Shadow's fierce, protective energy, Axel's fear was quieter. He didn't growl or snap. He simply recoiled, hiding in the darkest corners of his kennel. But Leah saw it. She always did. "He's not pushing us away," she whispered to Rachel. "He's just forgotten how to ask for help." Rachel smiled. The two of them began visiting every Saturday. They never forced interaction, just presence. Leah sketched, sometimes left treats, and Rachel read quietly like she used to. The staff watched, some skeptical at first, others curious, all remembering the miracle they'd once witnessed. Trish, ever supportive, said, "You know, watching you both work with him, it's like watching Shadow Spirit in motion." Over time, Axel inched closer. First a glance, then a step, then a moment where he lay down on his side, not out of submission, but surrender. One day, as Leah sketched him, Axel came close enough to sniff her knee. She didn't move, didn't speak, just smiled and let him decide. That night, on their drive home, Leah said softly, "He's not ready yet, but one day, he'll find his person, or maybe we'll be his people too." Rachel reached over and squeezed her hand. "You have the gentlest heart I've ever known." Time passed, and with it came seasons of change. Leia grew taller, her curls longer. She started middle school and began volunteering regularly at the shelter. Rachel, too, began offering therapy workshops to staff and volunteers, helping them recognize trauma in both animals and themselves. Axel, after months of slow, patient connection, finally walked outside the kennel on his own, leash trailing behind. Trish called it a breakthrough, but Leah called it something else. It's what happens when someone finally feels safe enough to take a risk. Word about Shadow's story, and now Axel's journey, spread beyond Vermont. A small local paper ran a feature, followed by a regional magazine. Soon, they were invited to speak at shelters in neighboring states, not as experts, just as people who believed healing was possible. One snowy January morning, Rachel opened their mailbox to find a letter. It was from a veteran who had read their story online. "Your dog, Shadow. He reminded me of myself. I'd given up. But your daughter, the way she saw him, it made me wonder if someone might see me that way too." Rachel cried quietly as she read it aloud to Leah. Healing ripples outward, sometimes in ways we'll never fully understand. That spring, Leah was given a school assignment. Write about a moment that changed your life. She chose the day she met Shadow. Her essay began simply. "Most people thought he was dangerous. I thought he was just scared, and I was right." She wrote of his slow progress, his transformation, the way he taught her patience, empathy, and how to sit with silence. Her teacher read it aloud in class. By the end, 3 students were crying, and one boy asked if he could go volunteer at the shelter too. Rachel framed the essay and placed it beside Shadow's photo in their living room. It was the story of a girl who loved without conditions and a dog who dared to believe again. Rachel often found herself returning to the field beneath the old oak tree, where Shadow now rested. Sometimes she'd bring a cup of coffee, a book, or just her thoughts. One day, she found a drawing pinned to the tree's bark, a child sketch of a girl and a German shepherd sitting side by side. Underneath were the words, "Thank you for teaching us how to love again." No name, no signature, just truth. Years passed, but Shadow's memory remained fresh, as if his presence was stitched into the very soil of their home, their town, their hearts. Leah, now a young woman, graduated high school with honors and a scholarship to study animal behavior and therapy. She gave her graduation speech standing at the podium with tears in her eyes and a worn leather collar in her hand. "This belonged to the first soul who showed me how to listen without words." Shadow didn't change because we forced him. He changed because someone finally stopped long enough to hear what he wasn't saying. The audience rose in a standing ovation. Rachel wept openly in the crowd, proud beyond words. After the ceremony, dozens approached them. Families who'd adopted shelter pets, kids who'd started volunteering, even adults who'd found the courage to heal their own wounds. It was never just about a dog. It was always about love, trust, and the quiet strength of choosing hope over fear. And Shadow, once deemed unadoptable, had become a symbol of what's possible when someone refuses to give up. One autumn afternoon, Rachel found an envelope tucked in the shelter's mailbox. No return address. Inside was a photograph. It showed Shadow, in his final year, resting beside Leah beneath the oak tree. On the back, scribbled in shaky handwriting, were the words, "He saved me too." No name, no explanation. But Rachel didn't need one. Shadow's story had traveled, through whispers, drawings, essays, and memories, reaching people they would never meet. She placed the photo beside the others in their hallway gallery, now lovingly called Shadow's Wall. It had grown from a single frame to dozens of photos of dogs, children, families, all changed by kindness. Leah added one last drawing that day, a picture of Shadow, not as he had been, but as he was in her dreams, standing tall, eyes bright, surrounded by stars. Below it, in her delicate handwriting, "Love never leaves. It just finds new ways to stay." Leah eventually went off to college, but the farmhouse never felt empty. Rachel kept Axel, now older and far more trusting, as her loyal companion. His transformation was quieter than Shadow's, but just as profound. Gone was the trembling dog, who flinched at Shadows. Now, Axel greeted visitors with curious eyes, sometimes even resting his head gently on their lap. Rachel continued her therapy work and expanded her outreach to include workshops for veterans, trauma survivors, and foster children, many of whom found a strange comfort in Axel's presence. He didn't need to do tricks or play fetch. Just being there was enough. The shelter became a hub of transformation, not just for animals, but for the people who came through its doors. On weekends, Rachel hosted storytelling circles where adopters shared their journeys, often ending in laughter and tears. Trish called it the shadow effect, the ripple of change born from one misunderstood creature who dared to trust again. Even years later, people still brought flowers to the oak tree. Sometimes children left dog biscuits. Others left letters. All of it spoke to one truth: love, real, patient, unconditional love, never dies. It simply keeps changing lives, long after the beating heart is gone. One day, years after Leia had left for grad school, Rachel received a call from a major publishing house. A writer who had attended one of her talks wanted to collaborate on a book. Not a dog training manual, he said, but a memoir, a tribute to Shadow, to your daughter, to everything that happened. Rachel hesitated. The story was sacred, deeply personal. But then she remembered the letter from the veteran, the drawings on the tree, the little boy who'd volunteered because of Leia's essay. Maybe sharing the story could help even more people. The book, titled The Dog Who Taught Us to Stay, became a quiet bestseller. Not explosive or flashy, just a slow, steady stream of readers who found it exactly when they needed it. Reviews poured in, not from critics, but from people. This book gave me hope. I finally adopted after reading this. I understand my own trauma better now. Leia co-authored the final chapter, weaving in her perspective with simple grace. I didn't save Shadow, she wrote. He saved me. He taught me that healing isn't loud, it's quiet. It's small steps. It's sitting beside someone even when they're too scared to speak. That chapter made grown men cry. As time passed, the world outside shifted, as it always does. But inside the farmhouse, inside the hearts of those touched by Shadow's story, something remained steady. Rachel retired early and began running the shelter full-time, transforming it into a sanctuary not just for dogs, but for healing. Axel passed quietly in his sleep at the age of 13, his head resting on Rachel's foot. She wept over his soft fur, whispering thanks into the hush of the morning. "You gave me peace," she said, "just like Shadow gave me purpose." His ashes were buried beside Shadow's, beneath the oak tree, where wildflowers grew tall and undisturbed. Leia, now a doctoral student, visited every few months. They'd sit beside the tree with coffee and memories, sometimes laughing, sometimes silent, always together. Rachel often caught herself staring at her daughter, noticing how she'd become the very thing she once tried to give to Shadow: patient, resilient, full of quiet strength. "You're still that little girl," Rachel said once, brushing hair behind Leia's ear, "the one who believed he was worth it." Leia smiled, "And you're still the mom who helped me prove it." One final spring brought with it something Rachel never expected: an award. The National Humane Society wanted to recognize her and Leia for their contributions to trauma-informed care in animal shelters. The ceremony was held in a packed auditorium, with dozens of shelters attending. As they walked onto the stage, photos of Shadow, Axel, and dozens of other dogs they'd helped over the years played on a large screen. Leia stood at the podium first, holding back tears as she began. "They said he was aggressive. They said he couldn't be saved. But they didn't see what I saw. Shadow was scared, not cruel. He just needed someone to sit in the silence with him, someone who didn't flinch. I was 10 years old when I met him, and he changed my life." When it was Rachel's turn, she looked out at the crowd, trainers, shelter workers, volunteers, and said, "Never underestimate the power of being still, of seeing what others miss. One dog taught me more about therapy than any classroom ever could." They received a standing ovation, but more than that, they received quiet nods, teary eyes, and grateful hearts, proof that Shadow's legacy would live on in every act of patient love. After the ceremony, as the crowd dispersed and the lights dimmed, Rachel and Leia stepped outside into the cool evening air. The stars were bright, the sky endless. Leia slipped her hand into her mother's. "Do you think Shadow knows?" she asked. Rachel looked up, tears brimming. "I think he always knew, even before we did." They stood there a while longer, wrapped in memory, in gratitude, in everything they'd built from that one moment outside a kennel so many years ago. A moment that seemed small then, but had since bloomed into a lifetime of healing. For a dog, a child, a family, and countless others they would never meet. As they walked toward the car, Rachel paused and looked back at the building, the lights inside warm and flickering. Somewhere in there, another dog waited, scared and silent. But this time, she knew someone would see him, really see him, because once upon a time, a little girl had looked past fear and seen a soul worth saving. And that changed everything.